Hey y'all, thanks for tuning in to Outdoor Indoor Texan. Today I'll be showing you how I make these delicious puff pastry pies using cubed venison meat, garlic butter mushrooms, and herb cheese. These are fantastic for parties and home meals alike, plus they're a great way to work through any venison meat you may have left over from last season. I use this recipe a lot on those tougher roasts that take too much slow cooking time to get around to, so instead I cube them up and pile up the pies. Getting things started, we're going to cook down our mushroom filling first. You'll need about a pound of sliced mushrooms for this recipe, and really it's up to you on what specific type of mushrooms you go with. I went with a store-bought mix of shiitake, oyster, and baby bellas. And yes, this looks like an insane amount of mushrooms, but remember that they will reduce considerably once cooked, so just trust me here and let's head over to the range. Put a pot on medium heat and toss in 4 tablespoons of salted butter. Once your butter's melted and starts to foam up, add 1 large diced shallot and 2 teaspoons of minced garlic. Let those sweat it out for a couple minutes, making sure to stir constantly so the garlic doesn't burn. Now add your mushrooms, and while you're stirring, make sure to lift up all that buttery goodness from the bottom of your pot. Then grab some olive oil and drizzle about a tablespoon or 2 over everything before adding the rest of our ingredients. Add 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, 1 tablespoon of chopped fresh thyme. If you're in a pinch, you can always sub Italian seasoning for this, but make the effort if you can because fresh thyme is just so much better. And finally, add a teaspoon or 2 of black pepper and then follow it up with a pinch of salt. Now mix all those ingredients in well and let the mushrooms cook down for about 8 to 10 minutes. Stir your pot every minute or 2 so nothing sticks too long to the bottom and ends up burning. Once the mushrooms are heavily reduced and softened, they'll probably look something like this. Go ahead and take them off the range and set them aside to cool for a bit while we move on to our next steps. This is also a good time to preheat your oven to 420 degrees Fahrenheit and prepare a baking sheet with either a baking mat, parchment paper, or whatever your go-to non-stick prep is for baking. Now let's talk about dough. We're going to be working with the easiest ready-made option, puff pastry dough. You can find these at just about any grocery store in the frozen section next to pie crusts. Buy 2 boxes, which should be 4 sheets of dough, so we know we have enough to work with. Once you're home, you'll need to thaw them out just enough to be able to unfold the dough sheets, but work with it while it's still as cold as possible. Once this dough warms up too much, it is impossible to work with. It gets all gummy and sticks to everything, and if that starts happening to you, just stick it back in your freezer for a couple minutes until it firms up again. Now, besides the mushrooms we've already prepped, we'll be using 2 boxes of boursin, garlic, and fine herbs cheese, which is also widely available in most grocery stores. Last but not least, we'll be using cubed up venison meat. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I took a top round roast sitting in my freezer and cubed up the meat, but you can use just about any muscle group you have on hand as long as it's somewhere between 1 and 2 pounds. Since we're trying to keep the dough as cold as possible, these next steps need to be as fast as possible. And if you look at my first group of hand pies that I make, there's always going to be an ugly one, so don't freak out if you mess up. You'll get better and better the more you make them in one sitting. Okay, so getting started, cut the puff pastry sheet into 4 equal squares. Now add a spoonful of venison meat to each one. After the meat, add a spoonful of mushrooms to each square. And I bet you know what's coming up next. Finally, add a spoonful of cheese to the top of each one. Now to form the pies, pick up the corners of the dough and bring them to the center until they touch. Then pinch everything closed. They'll look like a big wonton that you get at Chinese restaurants, but don't worry, they'll flatten out a great deal when they're cooking. Just keep repeating that until all 4 are pinched up and done. And like I said, don't freak out if you mess one up because that seems to always happen and you'll get better with all the repetition. You can see I messed up that back right one, but here's another shot of me making that wonton shape in case you need to see it again. Once you're done with round 1, take those pies off the tray and let them sit in the fridge while you repeat all those steps until you're completely out of your filling ingredients. I've found the more that you do it, the better you'll be at judging how much filling to put in each one, and for me, I always end up with a little bit of extra mushrooms left over, but since they're really good on their own, it's just a great side snack. Once you run out of filling and all your pockets are stuffed and pinched, you should have about a dozen pies ready to go. But before throwing them into the oven, whisk a single egg inside a bowl and then use a basting brush, painting the outside of the dough with your egg wash. Now just pop them in your preheated 425-degree oven and let them bake somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes. Keep a close eye on them while they're baking and take them out once they've puffed up and are showing a crispy and browned top. Well, you just look at how well those transformed coming out of the oven. And I know they look so good you'll want to dive in immediately, but give them a solid 10 to 20 minute rest so they can properly cool and firm up a bit so you can handle these pies without having them fall apart on you. When it's finally time to eat, you will not be disappointed. The outside dough is flaky and crispy, but then breaks away to a delicious, cheesy, buttery, herbaceous center with just the perfect little bites of venison. Stack them high on a plate with your dip and sauce of choice and watch them disappear in record time. That'll do it for this one, and thank you all so much for watching. Let me know in the comments below if you have any follow-up questions or tweaks of your own. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing for more great content to come. All right, y'all, take care.